Hello and welcome to another reflection from Streatham Vale Baptist Church. We're continuing to follow John's Gospel and ask the question, how can we love like Jesus does? And we've come to a scene in John chapter 8, in which the Pharisees and the teachers of the law once again attempt to trap Jesus, this time by using a woman caught in adultery. So let's read John chapter 8, starting from verse 2 and going to verse 11. At dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap, in order to have a basis for accusing him. Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." So as we reflect upon this scene, let us consider the different characters that we find. Firstly, we have the adulterous woman. The passage makes it clear that there is no doubt about her guilt in committing adultery. The question is not whether she committed it or not, but what should be done about it. And it's important to note a couple of things. Firstly, the woman does not attempt to defend herself or her acts. She recognized that she sinned and had not behaved in keeping with the law. She seems almost resigned to her fate, as if recognizing that there was nothing she could do to purify or save herself. Secondly, we should also note that it was the woman alone who was brought before Jesus, and not the man with whom she committed the adultery. In ancient Israel, adultery was punishable by death for both partners in the activity. But this was a common injustice that, unfortunately, still sometimes and in some places persists to this day, in which the woman was judged and condemned more fiercely for a crime that a man might never be punished for. Here it seems apparent that the religious authorities were keen to see the woman punished, but had let the partner go free. Thirdly, and importantly, is the way that Jesus offered the grace and truth to the woman. The woman was standing condemned and facing the possibility of execution. To her, it probably seemed as if there was no hope left. And then the Pharisees and the teachers of the law bring her in front of Jesus, and the whole outlook of her situation changed. Through Jesus' words and his presence, this woman transforms from a guilty woman condemned to death to a forgiven woman, given a new lease of life. She is set free from the punishment that her sin had caused. She was released, with the instruction to sin no longer. No longer were the teachers of the law or Pharisees demanding her punishment. The woman's accusers had vanished back into the background, as Jesus stood offering her grace and truth. So this leads us on to thinking about those Pharisees and teachers of the law. These people were seen, both by themselves and by society, as the religious authorities, and were those who interpreted and enforced the law, and punished any breaking of it. These religious authorities interpreted the law given by Moses to such an extent that an oral law was created, which denoted all the ways people should behave in daily life to prevent even the possibility of accidentally breaking the written law. So these people were very keen on following the rules and also ensuring that everyone else obeyed. In this scene, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law brought to Jesus a woman who was caught in adultery. Now, while it's clear that they want to see the law followed and the woman punished, it's evident that their main aim was to discredit Jesus and to see him accused of some court charge or other. Their behaviour towards the woman is callous and demeaning. She probably would have been feeling incredibly scared, ashamed, and upset at being discovered. And then added to this, she is made the centre of attention in front of a crowd of people and in front of Jesus, thus adding public humiliation to her situation. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law interrupted Jesus' teachings to ensure he was surrounded by a large crowd. They wanted to trap him in front of many witnesses. But what exactly was the trap? As they are keen to mention, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. They're referring to verses such as Deuteronomy 22, verse 22. If a man is found sleeping with another man's wife, both the man who had slept with her and the woman must die. You must purge the evil from Israel. Of course, as mentioned earlier, they seem to miss the command that both man and woman are to be punished equally. It also doesn't say anything about stoning, so don't know where they got that one from. It's clear that they want to know whether Jesus will follow the Mosaic law. If Jesus refused to condemn the woman, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law would charge Jesus with contradicting the law of God and would condemn him. However, if Jesus chose to suggest that she should be killed, not only would he lose his reputation for compassion and mercy, but he'd also be at risk from the civil Roman authorities, as in their law, adultery was not punished by death. So quite a conundrum. Another group of people in this scene is the crowd. Now, we don't really hear much from them, other than that they were there listening to Jesus. We don't know what they were thinking or feeling. We don't know what they do. The implication from the passage is that they just passively watched the scene and waited to see what was happening. They metaphorically were sitting on the fence. It seems they were at least interested in listening to Jesus, as they were present because they were hearing him teach. But when the Pharisees and the teachers of the law challenge Jesus, they do not speak up or in any other way get involved. As far as we know, none of them comment on the fact that only the woman was standing condemned for a crime that needs two people to commit. We don't see them backing Jesus or the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Instead, they just watch and see what happens. And finally, and most importantly of all, we have Jesus, who acts with both compassion and justice, grace and truth, as he expertly turns the trap the Pharisees had set back on themselves. As we've just noticed, Jesus was teaching in the temple courts when he was interrupted by the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. The religious authorities attempt to press Jesus for an immediate and possibly half-thought-out answer. Now, what do you say? This question is emphatic and insistent, as if saying, "Oi, you there, tell us what you say now." But Jesus was not going to be drawn into a rapid test of wits, or to be pressured to give the half-thought answer that I suspect the Pharisees wanted. Instead, he pauses, writing on the ground and temporarily ignoring their persistent demands for answers. Only when he is ready does Jesus straighten up and say, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And then he returns to writing on the ground, while one by one the woman's accusers disappear off, realizing that none of them could claim to be sinless. When they have all left, Jesus turns to the woman and asks, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Out of all the characters in the group, Jesus was the only one who truly could have picked up that stone, as he was the only one without sin. But instead, Jesus shows a perfect mix of grace and truth. He shows compassion to her by forgiving her and not condemning her. He redeems her. But he also shows justice. He instructs her to leave her life of sin, to be no longer bound by the sin that was entangling her. So what about us? Having looked at the different characters in the scene, I'd like to consider how they can sometimes reflect our own habits and attitudes, and what we can learn from this. So firstly, the adulterous woman. In many ways, the woman caught in adultery was just an ordinary person, just like any one of us, who got caught sinning. We all sin. It's an unfortunate fact of life. We all fall into temptation and follow the desires and cravings of our sinful nature, instead of listening to our perfect God's guidance and wisdom. So just like the woman, there is no doubt regarding our guilt. We are all guilty of rebelling against God. Do we realise our guilt and rebellion against God? Are we aware of the fact that there is nothing we can do to save or purify ourselves? Do we accept our situation like that woman did? Or do we try and deny that we have done anything wrong? Perhaps we try to justify our decision. It was only a little thing. It didn't hurt anyone. It's not like I've done anything seriously. Others have done worse. Will we recognise the seriousness of our situation as we come before God today? Because, like the woman, we also have the opportunity to be completely freed from our sin and our rightful punishment, but only if we come before God with truly repentant hearts. Jesus stands before us, just as he stood before the woman, and he offers to take our sin and punishment on himself and give us his righteousness. He holds out this invitation for anyone and everyone, but we have to choose to lay aside our pride and self-sufficiency and recognise how much we truly need God. Are we willing to do that? And then we turn to looking at the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And when we consider their actions, we might be tempted to argue that we are nothing like them. We're not deliberately intending to attack or trap Jesus, or to condemn and demean others. But while we may not actively seek to do harm to others or to discredit Jesus, we do sometimes have a tendency to hold tight to rules, tradition, and regulations. We like to feel in control, and one of the ways we have to maintain control is to set rules. If you obey the rules, you're part of the in crowd, and if you dissipate them, you become part of the out crowd, the outsiders. Jesus came to open the invitation to everyone and to show how we can be forgiven and loved by God. But sometimes we, like the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, can be guilty of putting boundaries and barriers in the way that prevent people from accessing that all-encompassing love of God. As we examine ourselves, can we ask God to highlight those areas where we have put up boundaries that stop people from coming to him? Let the Holy Spirit nudge you to those things he wants you to let go control of. He wants us to show love to others, and that includes letting God have control of the guest list, instead of us acting as bouncers denying people entry to his kingdom. Or perhaps sometimes we are more like the crowd. We don't want to get involved, so we keep our heads down and refuse to speak up. We just watch events from afar and do not commit to any action that may cause attention to be pointed at us. While it is a tempting position, Jesus calls us to be distinctive, radical, people who work for change and a disruption of the status quo. Jesus doesn't want us to sit on the sidelines and wait for things to occur passively. He wants us to be engaged with bringing about his kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. The Pharisees were harsh in their treatment of the woman. While it was true that she had sinned, she was also being humiliated and treated badly. And the crowd merely watched on, not moving to help in any way. When we see people being treated badly, or we encounter situations of injustice, God asks us to step outside our comfort zone and work to help to fight against the injustice and cruelty of the world. How might God be calling you out of the crowd and into the scene to intervene in situations and places you encounter in your life? And finally, as we look at the question of how we love like Jesus, we turn our attention now to seeing what we learn from the way Jesus acted in the scene. And as we've mentioned, firstly, Jesus didn't allow Pharisees or the teachers of the law to rush him. When people had questions for us, whether faith-related or not, we often feel like we must give this instant answer. But here we see Jesus taking his time in answering the question. If Jesus, King of the universe, took time to answer the questions thrown at him, how much more frequently will we need to take time and to consider how to answer questions thrown in our direction? Jesus' interaction with religious authority gives us permission to pause before answering, and even to say, I don't have an answer for that yet. Can I think about it and tell you later? We do not have to be pushed to give a rushed answer. And secondly, and most importantly, is the way that Jesus responds with both grace and truth. It can be a hard balance to be forgiving and graceful, but also challenging and truthful. So often we fall on one side or the other, instead of being able to walk that fine line. Perhaps we're more likely to show grace and attempt to dismiss or minimize the wrongdoings of another, or ourselves even. But Jesus calls us to a life of holiness. He said to the woman, leave your life of sin. Is there anything, any sin that we are aware of in our own lives that we need to stop? Or is there something that you feel called to gently challenge or draw attention to in the life of a loved one? How are we being called to live out that life of holiness? Or perhaps we fall more towards the side of truth. We're keen to stick to that life of holiness so much that forgiveness and grace are difficult to give. In this, we run the risk of becoming judgmental and legalistic, instead of welcoming people into the free and forgiving love of Jesus. We set a list of conditions that people must meet before getting to know God. And often this is subconscious, and we do not even realise we are excluding people based on our own judgments. And we can also do it for ourselves. We can beat ourselves up for not being perfect all the time. We convince ourselves that Jesus couldn't love us because of all the things that we do wrong. But grace is as important as truth. Be graceful to others and to yourself. Grace and truth have equal importance in the kingdom of God. So perhaps you might want to go back and read through the passage again, paying attention to the way the different characters act. Can you see yourself reflected in any or all of the characters? How is this comforting you? How is this challenging you? Ask yourself the question, what might God be saying to you?